The sun blazed down on the quiet suburban street as the clock ticked past noon. Marcus Blackwell sat on his porch, the cool breeze brushing against his face, while his dog, Max, lay beside him in the shade. It was a rare moment of peace, something he had learned to appreciate after the years of warfare, chaos, and violence he had seen. Now, far removed from the battlefields of the world, Marcus had found solace in the mundane rhythm of everyday life. His time in the Delta Force was behind him. But as always, the world had a way of reminding him that no peace was ever truly permanent. Max, his loyal German shepherd, raised his head suddenly, ears perked. Marcus's eyes narrowed, sensing something wasn't right. Without a word, he stood up, watching the street with a trained eye. His military instincts were sharp. Years of tracking, observing, and surviving had taught him to always be alert. Before he could take another step, the flashing lights of a police car broke the stillness of the afternoon. Marcus glanced at his watch. No emergency sirens, no signs of an immediate threat, but the officer had parked too close to his property. His gut tightened. Something felt off. The car door opened, and two uniformed officers stepped out, their faces unreadable. Marcus instinctively assessed the situation. One of the officers was younger, a bit too eager, while the other seemed older, more experienced, with a cold edge to his demeanor. They were both walking toward him, their hands resting near their holsters. Max growled low at their approach. Marcus placed a hand on his dog's shoulder, signaling for him to remain calm. His dog knew better than to start a fight unless absolutely necessary. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus greeted them, his voice steady but guarded. "What's the problem?" The younger officer, his hand still near his gun, shot him a suspicious look. "We've had reports of a disturbance, sir. You were seen arguing with someone earlier. We need to check things out." Marcus's brow furrowed. He hadn't spoken to anyone except the occasional neighbor. No argument, no disturbance. But the officers weren't here to chat about the weather. He could feel their hostility from a mile away. Something wasn't right. "Is there a reason you're on my property?" Marcus asked, his calm voice hiding the growing unease inside him. "We're just following protocol," the older officer replied with a dismissive shrug. "Step back, sir." Marcus didn't move, standing tall. "I'm not going anywhere. I haven't done anything wrong." Max growled again, more aggressively this time, and the officers took notice. The younger officer reached for his taser. That's when Marcus knew they weren't here for anything but trouble. Without warning, the younger officer moved closer, trying to assert his authority. "Stay back," he barked. "You're not allowed to—" Before he could finish, Max lunged at the officer's outstretched arm, his teeth bared, but Marcus immediately called him back. He wasn't about to let this escalate further, especially not with the situation already spiraling out of control. "Easy, Max," Marcus shouted, his voice firm but controlled. The older officer's hand moved to his gun now, and in that moment, Marcus felt the gravity of the situation. These officers had no idea who they were dealing with. His past had taught him how to fight, how to survive, and he wasn't afraid to unleash that fury again if necessary. But it wasn't about that. Not yet. What mattered was getting through this without the need for violence. "What is this really about?" Marcus asked, his voice growing colder. "You're here to harass me because my dog growled?" The officers exchanged a glance, and in that instant, Marcus realized the younger officer had already crossed a line. His anger had taken over, his judgment clouded. "We need to take control of this situation now," the older officer muttered, pulling out his firearm. That's when the young officer made a critical mistake. Without warning, he aimed the gun at Max, his finger tightening on the trigger. Marcus's blood ran cold. He was no longer just an ex-soldier or a civilian. This was a man who had been trained to deal with threats in the most dangerous ways, and right now the threat was in front of him. "No!" Marcus shouted, but it was too late. The shot rang out, echoing across the quiet neighborhood. Max yelped in pain as the bullet struck him, sending the dog crashing to the ground. For a moment, time stopped. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, his hands shaking with the realization of what had just happened. Max was the only family Marcus had left, the only connection to his past. The officers had no idea that they had just crossed a line they would never be able to erase. They had no idea who they had just pissed off. Without a word, Marcus turned toward the officer, his eyes narrowing with fury. He had been pushed too far. He wasn't about to let this go. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Marcus Blackwell watched his dog, Max, crumple to the ground, the life draining from his loyal companion's eyes. Time itself seemed to freeze in that single moment of shock. The gunshot had shattered the peace of the afternoon. But it was more than just a sound. It was the moment that would change everything for Marcus. Max's painful whimper echoed in Marcus's ears as he fell to his knees beside his dog, the cold steel of his past surging through his veins. His hands shook, but not from fear, from anger, from a fury he had long buried under layers of silence and restraint. This was not just about a dog. It was not just about an officer's mistake. This was about something far bigger, something that had been ignited within Marcus the moment that bullet left the officer's gun. His military training kicked in. Every movement felt deliberate, calculated. His breathing slowed and his mind sharpened. Marcus had been in countless firefights, survived the horrors of war, but none of that mattered now. None of it mattered as much as the injustice that had just been done in front of him. Max, his partner, his friend, was gone. "You made a huge mistake," Marcus said, his voice as cold as steel as he rose to his feet. His gaze locked on the two officers standing frozen in place, their eyes wide with fear. The younger officer fumbled with his gun, his shaking hands making it clear that he was regretting his actions, but the damage had already been done. The older officer remained silent, his face pale, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "I said you made a mistake," Marcus repeated, his voice hardening. His muscles tensed, but he didn't take another step. He was too focused, too controlled. The officers had no idea what they had done. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Marcus wasn't just a man angry at the loss of his dog. He wasn't just a civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus Blackwell was a former Delta Force commander, one of the most lethal and skilled operatives to ever serve in the military. He had been through things that these officers couldn't even begin to comprehend. They had no idea who they were threatening. The younger officer, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, stepped back. "Please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "We didn't mean to." Marcus cut him off, his voice seething with the weight of every suppressed emotion. "You didn't mean to? You shot my dog? You think not meaning to makes it okay?" There was a dangerous calm in his tone now, one that only came from years of dealing with life or death situations. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his home. Max was more than just a pet. He was a part of Marcus's life, a constant reminder of the things Marcus had fought for. The love and loyalty of a dog like Max was priceless, and the officers had taken that away without even understanding the consequences. "I'm calling for backup," the older officer said, his voice low and shaky. "We need to get this under control." But Marcus wasn't listening to him. He had already made his decision. His eyes never left the officers, his entire body poised like a coiled spring ready to snap. He wasn't about to let this slide. "You can call all the backup you want," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "But make no mistake, this is just the beginning. You may not have realized it, but you've just walked into a fight that you won't be able to walk out of easily. Not with me." The younger officer looked back at his partner, his face pale, a bead of sweat running down his forehead. The older officer shifted uncomfortably but didn't move. They knew Marcus wasn't bluffing. "I'm not going to let this go," Marcus continued, his fists clenched. "You'll regret what you've done." The officers stood there, stunned. Their faces were a mix of confusion and fear as they processed the weight of Marcus's words. One of the officers finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't know who you were." Marcus stared at them, his eyes hardening. "That's your problem. You didn't take the time to learn who you were dealing with. You didn't bother to ask the right questions before you pulled the trigger. That's why I'm still standing here, and you're going to have to answer for what you've done." With that, Marcus turned his back on them, walking toward the street where his phone was waiting. As he pulled it from his pocket, he dialed a number, his voice calm and clear. "Get me in touch with the highest-ranking officer in this department," he said, his tone icy. "I've got a message for them." The officers behind him stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The situation had spiraled out of their control, and they knew that no matter how this played out, it would never be the same again. As Marcus dialed again, the realization settled over him. He wasn't just going to fight for justice. He was going to show them exactly what.